Hello. Today's Introduction to Manufacturing class is on pneumatics. If you remember from yesterday, or the previous session I should say, not necessarily yesterday, that we did discuss hydraulics. Very similar concepts. Hydraulics uses it's a type of fluid. Pneumatic creates or utilizes the use of air. So we're going to jump right into some pneumatic terms. PSI is used to identify how much pressure in a pneumatic system. 50 PSI to 100 PSI. PSI is equal to pounds per square inch. That is, we're going to talk a little bit more about compressed air, which uses an air compressor. Atmospheric air is the weight per square inch exerted on the Earth's surface by the air from the surface. So if we were at sea level, which would be nice to be at the beach right about now, if we were, the pressure from the atmosphere that we would actually feel on our shoulders is 14.7 psi. So depending on where you're at on the planet, if you're in a more higher elevation, it's probably going to be a little bit less. If you're below sea level, it would be a little bit more. So the matter of knowing where you're at really makes a difference. Compressed air, that is taking actual atmospheric air and compressing it or increasing the pressure using an air compressor. Air compressor converts atmospheric air, 14.7 psi at sea level, to a compressed air, which is typically above atmospheric air, usually somewhere in the neighborhood about 125 to 150 psi, depending on the type of work you're doing, even larger in some cases. You want to make sure that you don't overrun what your system is capable of handling. So if you have hoses or tools or valves that are all rated for 100 psi or 125 psi system, you don't want to be pumping 150 psi into that. So you got to keep that in mind. A dryer is used to remove liquids from compressed air. Well, as you know, atmospheric pressure, there's usually a little bit of humidity, and as you compress that, it creates what? It creates a little bit of heat, and it creates a little bit of water. So you want to be able to remove that. You don't want water flowing throughout your pneumatic system. They tend to rust and corrode your parts, so you want to try to dry it as much as possible. Receiver tank. As you know, most air compressors usually have a receiver tank that go along with it. It's part of its unit. Sometimes you may have a receiver tank somewhere near your actuator or near your valves or whatever is going to do the work. So you keep in mind your receiver tank doesn't necessarily have to be right there. The term port, I know we're sitting there thinking about atmospheric pressure and being at the beach, and you think, well, there's a port over there. It's probably a cruise ship. I can get on it. Well, that's not that type of port. As we learned in hydraulics, a port is actually a connection point where the hard piping or tubing connects to a valve or even to your air compressor or maybe to your receiver tank or to something. It's actually the location of where things are connected. It's called a port. Flow control valves. Flow control valves are used to control the speed. It actually controls how fast the air is flowing through a device. And you can adjust it. There's usually flow control valves have adjustments on it. Pressure gauges are used to provide a reading of the pressure system in certain areas. Usually they're called PSIG, pounds per square inch gauge. They either can be analog using a dial or sometimes, most cases now along the digital ones. Digitals provide a much faster reading and sometimes can even be wirelessly fed to a handheld device or a computer system that's doing the numeric controls for it. Continuing on with terms, directional control valve can be used to control the flow, the direction of the compressed air. I like the term detented. These can be detented where the valve locks in position and must be pushed back by a solenoid or spring operated. So understand that directional control valves have to be controlled somehow, whether they're manually controlled or maybe detented, where they can actually be pushed back and forth using certain types of electronic equipment or like magnets and such. So keep that in mind. Exhaust muffler may be used to the noise reduction when the air motors or exhaust ports of directional control valves are in operation. You will see that when the air is being released from an actuator, the air has to go somewhere. And typically that air makes noise. And sometimes in large PSI systems, that noise can be very large. And remember, we're working around that. Humans are working around that, and it can be very loud to our ears and sensitive. So You can call it an exhaust muffler. To this case, for a pneumatic system, is probably as a personal protecting device to actually protect your ears or the environment around it. The attached video for pneumatics, we have a very good example of a directional control valve as well as a flow control valve. And there's even a muffler on that you'll be able to see, as well as a cylinder and an actuator of a cylinder going up and down. You'll be able to see that in the video that's included with this. Continuing on, you have a lockout valve. It's a pressure blocking valve that relieves downstream air pressure. What it does is when you lock that out, it relieves the pressure at the same time of what's downstream. So if you're working on it, if you're a maintenance person, you need to work on the line, you can turn off the lockout valve. It relieves the pressure till you see 0 on your reading, and then you can go over and open up and work on all you want to. Shut-off valve is a manual valve used to shut off a pneumatic system. The term proportional is used to describe the type of an automatic valve. There's different types of automatic valves. Proportional is one of them. Lubricator is used to add lubricating oil at the point of use. So remember, I'm drying the air, so I'm forcing dry air through tools. Maybe it's an air wrench, maybe it's a cylinder, maybe it is some sort of a linear device working. So you kind of have to, a pneumatic motor. And so you kind of have to understand what you're doing. So putting a little bit of lubricating oil into the air allows it to keep the seals, keep any type of lubrication going on so that it doesn't dry out. Dry air tends to dry seals. Those are the things that keep the connector devices at the ports and stuff, to keep the air out of it or keep the air in to keep the pressure up. So lubricator is very important. A cylinder is a linear device used to perform work, maybe a single acting where the compressed air moves the device in one direction and a spring returns it, or a double acting where air pushes the cylinder one way and then the directional control valve moves, adjusting it to push the air the other direction, and usually there is an exhaust muffler there to allow the air to escape while it does that. Air motor is a rotating device used to perform work. It's just like an electrical motor. Instead of electricity pushing the motor around, you're going to utilize air with the vanes. You're going to have vanes. The vanes catch the air, and as the air is caught, it spins a shaft, and hopefully in the end you have a pulley system or some sort of mechanism to actually do the work for you. You have filters. You have different types. You have a colascaline filter, which is used to remove liquids from the compressed air, and then a particulate filter, which is used to remove solids. Hosing and tubing is used for low pressure compressed systems. You would use hard tubing for anything that's higher, usually less than 100 psi. You'd actually have hard tubing, maybe copper or steel, or anything lower than that. You can use hoses or flexible tubing to do that. ISO, you've heard this before, International Organization for Standardization. If I had a pneumatic set of plans here in front of me, they would have certain type of symbols on it. Those symbols are maintained and by the ISO to make sure that it's universal across the board. Pressure regulating valve, it can be adjustable valve that adjusts the pressure of the system. Pneumatic controls, there are a series of valves or relays that uses low pressure to actually, in the control industrial equipment that actually does controlling. It makes sure the valves come on. Maybe it adjusts the directional control valves. Maybe it even adjusts the flow control valves to make sure that I'm getting the proper pressures and the proper air to the proper places to do the work that I want to do using pneumatic controls. Pressure switch is an automatic switch that turns on or off the device, usually set at a certain PSI. In this case, we have 175 set up here in our example, but it can be at any type. I have a air compressor at my house. I use it for certain tools, air up car tires. Mine is set up at 100 psi. The biggest thing I need it for is a nail gun. My nail gun operates at 95 psi, so I know I always have at least 100 psi in my system, usually at any given time. Pressure relief valve is a non-adjustable safety valve required by OSHA to release pressure if it gets over that set pressure switch. So like at my house, I have a pressure relief valve on my air compressor and at the tank, so that if it, sometimes I do hear it, it makes a loud swishing noise where the air is escaping. Usually what happens is the air compressor shuts off, the pressure relief valve goes off, lowering the pressure down to close to my preset pressure switch. Tube fitting is commonly used in systems to make tube connections. It can be compression style or push lock style. Where again, these are tube fittings. They make tube connections from tube to tube, not tube to a valve or tube to a pump. Those are ports. I'm going to connect those to ports. All right, when we're talking about pneumatics, we definitely want to talk about, we're talking about PSI, we're talking about creating pressure. We want to make sure we stay safe. So pneumatic safety is very important. We want to make sure I use our proper personal protective equipment, our PPEs, including our hearing protection. Maybe it's using something, goggles if I'm around a type of air tool that's could possibly create sparks or anything else. Maybe even a face shield. I don't want to have compressed air being blown in my face. I definitely don't want it on my body because remember, there is going to be, of course, the pressure itself, but there's also going to be a little bit of oil in there too, and I don't want that on a body as well. As a safety guide, use the hose or tubing on high pressure compressed air over 50 psi should be kept to a very minimal. If a hose or tube is over 4 feet long, it should have its own shutoff valve. That's just so that you kind of mitigate any types of problems in there. It has its own shutoff valve. You can shut it off, isolate the problem without having to shut down the whole system. All pipes, hoses, and fittings of a system must have a rating, and that rating must be noted on the valve, the hoses, or the fittings. Hoses and tubing used in the system will have an identification marking that indicates the maximum working pressure. That's again WP of 45 psi, or whatever the psi is for that type of working for that condition. So again, that is it for pneumatics. It is a very cursory course. Good luck on your quizzes out there, and see you in the next class. Thank you.